There is a book that never made the canon, a text whispered about in archive footnotes, a scrap in a catalog, a margin note that trembles when you run a finger over it. They call it, in rumor, the Gospel of Lilith. Not a devotional tract, not a prayer book, but a voice, a claim, a declaration of what the first woman remembered and what those who wrote history refused to hear. Tonight, we open that forbidden page. They erased her name. They painted her as monster. But what if the first woman refused a role written by others, and then wrote back? What if a gospel survives where she names the world and teaches others how to speak it? All creation myths turn on a single question. Who speaks the first word? In some stories, that voice is male, authoritative, uncontested. In others, the first voice is plural, shared, reciprocal. The story the world mostly remembers gives one of those voices the stage, and the other, the shadows. But fragments exist that suggest an alternative opening. The medieval Alphabet of Ben Sira preserves an argument. Lilith is Adam's first consort, created from the same earth, refusing to relegate herself to shadow. In one line, she speaks the divine name and steps away. That line has teeth. It has consequences. Tonight, we follow Lilith's rumored gospel, its origin, its suppression, the places it hid, and the way its voice returns, in fragments, in dream visions, in the margins of banned manuscripts. We will stand at the edge between scholarship and rumor, and listen for the word that refuses to be erased. Imagine the first breath of the world. Clay cooled under a sun that did not yet know names. Two figures formed, not maker and made, but two hands of the same shaping. In one tradition, preserved in medieval Jewish folklore and recorded in the Alphabet of Ben Sira, that companion spoke back. The Alphabet of Ben Sira, fragments catalogued today in various manuscript collections, tells of a wife who refused to lie beneath Adam. When he commanded, she would not obey. She spoke the ineffable name, and she left. That is the story the fathers call sin. The gospel calls it sovereignty. But to chase Lilith only inside medieval Jewish lore is to miss her older shape. Sumerian and Akkadian tablets from Ur and Babylon name a class of night spirits, low-Q women of wind and threshold, who slip between worlds. Inscribed seals like those in the Louvre catalog, for example, AO 18,899 show winged female figures flanked by owls, silent sentinels of the night. These images and names morph across centuries until someone somewhere wrote her song down. The Arslan Tash amulets, excavated in the early 20th century, contain incantations invoking names meant to protect infants from night terrors. On some, the characters around the edge look like forms later associated with Lilith. The presence of protective rites, the fact that priests invoked her name to bind her, suggests not absence, but negotiation. Authorities who feared what she could do, and therefore tried to control it. So imagine a text that begins not with obedience, but with refusal. A gospel that would say, plainly, I will not be a shadow. And then the audacious part it teaches. The extant rumor of such a text describes a voice that is part myth and part manual. It contains poetic first-person passages. I was formed from river clay, and I refused to bow, followed by procedural sections. Names, intonations, star alignments. The gospel, as it is whispered, teaches how breath can be aligned to the motion of Venus, how a name can act as an anchor, how the world listens when spoken to correctly. This is not purely speculation. Cross-cultural echoes exist. Egyptian Heka, the power of the word, Babylonian incantations, and Hebrew ritual formulas all treat language like technology. If Egyptians encoded phonetic commands into architecture, if Mesopotamians carved incantations on amulets, then why could a woman not inherit that same craft and use it to claim autonomy? Power hates rival voices. When a text suggests the first woman was not a subordinate, someone with authority will curtail its reach. Early church councils and later medieval authorities moved in similar fashion, not always through spectacle, sometimes through bureaucracy. The Council of Trullo in 692 CE included condemnations of apocryphal materials circulating in Syrian and Eastern monastic communities. Works attributed to women, where those that elevated feminine authority were suspect. Centuries later, the Toledo School of Translators, a crossroads where Arabic, Latin, and Hebrew knowledge met, became a repository of dangerous texts. Catalog entries from the 12th and 13th centuries reference works with titles like Liber Lilītu or Book of the Night Woman. The entry might be nothing but a title, but titles are dangerous. They give shape to rumor. They give librarians cause for action. One fragment cited by scholars appears in the margins of a Latin codex, the Codex Caesianus 38, where a scribe noted a gloss. Some call her Lilith, who first named the star. It's a tiny mark, easily overlooked, but for the determined, it is a breadcrumb. By the late medieval period, demonological literature repurposed her into cautionary tale. Works like the Malleus Maleficarum and other witch-hunting manuals used the specter of the night woman to justify persecution. Names once used to bind were now used to bind differently, to bind women inside confessional architecture. Suppression had a double edge. When institutions blot out a voice, they also announce its power. Each ban, each decree, is a signal that something worth hiding exists. The gospel, if it existed in full, did not disappear so much as scatter. Pages burned here, a sealed folio there, an amulet placed under a floorboard in another town. And while church courts burned or banned, other hands copied. Secret manuscripts circulated. Coptic prayers against the night woman preserved in British Library Oriental manuscript collections. A 15th century marginal note in a French library referencing a mirror of the Mother of Exiles. Even when texts were seized, the knowledge they contained names, rhythms, the feel of particular vows slipped into other practices. Folk songs, bedside prayers, whispered charms. Thus, the gospel endured. Split, secret, adaptive. Its survival strategy was fragmentation. It made it harder to prove, easier to mythologize, and thus more potent. Below cities, in the repositories no tourist sees, words sleep between sheets of muslin in Rome's apostolic archive. Once the secret Archivio Segreto Vatican. Now the Vatican Apostolic Archive, catalog cards, marked volumes, known consultably. Among the entries, scholars whisper, are references so provocative the staff refused to open them to all but specialized remits. One such card allegedly records a Latin line in principio, erat verbum, et mulier. In the beginning was the word and a woman. The card is real. The open file not. This is how institutional memory functions. A visible index hiding a buried truth. Crossing the Mediterranean, the Louvre's catalog preserves seals and amulets, including AO 18,899, a small Mesopotamian disc bearing a winged female figure. Its silhouette is echoed across centuries. It is the shape artists return to when they want Lilith to be legible. Archaeologists trace these iconographies to the same motifs found on Arslan Tash amulets and Babylonian cylinder seals. In the 20th century, scholars like Margaret Murray argued that hidden goddess cults and remnants of ancient matriarchal worship persisted in folk practice. Tug Murray's methods have been criticized. Her work reopened scholarly eyes to the possibility that stories like Lilith's carried more than mere legend. Later feminist theologians, Judith Plasko-Barbara Koltov, among them, reread these fragments as theology, not only folklore. Sacred texts reframed as expressions of female agency. And then the digital age arrived. Archives digitized, PDFs leaked, scans circulated on occult forums. A verse that once hid in a monastery's margin now appears as a low-resolution JPG on a message board. A chant once taught by candlelight is now looped in a bedroom on a 3 a.m. livestream. The gospel has found new vessels. Reports flood in, not concrete proof of miracles, but patterns. People who transcribe suspected passages report vivid dreams. Dunes of black sand. A woman with wings calling names in an unfamiliar tongue. Others describe physiological shifts after chanting fragments. Heart rate changes. A feeling of delineated presence. The sensation of walking into a room that remembers them. Whether you call these experiences psychological or spiritual is less important than their effect. They make listeners change. They coax a private recognition. The idea that voice shapes the world, and that some voices were hidden deliberately. So what does the gospel do if we take the fragments seriously? It does 3 things. 1. It reclaims agency. In first-person passages, Lilith declares authorship. I named myself Dawn. That act of naming is performative. A speech act that rewrites identity. For listeners, especially women in patriarchal contexts, that claim reads less like myth and more like instruction. 2. It teaches technics. Fragments suggest a grammar of breath and cadence, vowel shapes, breath length, star alignment Venus. The morning star appears frequently in these lines. These are not metaphors to believers, they are practices. If Egyptian Heka and Babylonian incantations worked by precise articulation, so could a text of Lilith's employing similar modalities. 3. It survives by being reinterpreted. From talisman to feminist icon, Lilith's story adapts. The Nag Hammadi codices showed us how apocryphal gospels reframed known stories into subversive teachings. A text lost to one tradition can be found in another's margin. The point is not always origin. The point is function. To teach a different way to be. We have scientific analogs. Studies of rhythmic chant show changes in neural synchrony. Studies of ritual indicate people can experience altered states of consciousness without drug intervention. The Gospel of Lilith, if it includes chantable lines and a grammar for breath, could produce similar effects. That does not prove supernatural action. It does explain why listeners report chains. It shows how a scripture can be both manual and myth. Legend speaks of a mirror, not glass for vanity, but a polished bronze disc, older than many kingdoms. Some call a similar object the Mirror of Arsenu. Other whispers name it differently. The point is the same. A reflective surface inscribed with characters that refused translation. Those who claim to have glimpsed it tell the same story. The symbols move. A photograph cannot hold them. The afterimage lingers in dreams. The winged woman steps from the mirror, outlines the world with a finger, and names what she sees. The Gospel's last extant lines, in passage and paraphrase, read like "Teast, look into the mirror I bring, see your refusal, know the name they hid from you." That is the text's power. It asks you to recognize yourself as someone who might refuse the scripts handed down to you, to become author, not actor. Why does the Gospel of Lilith matter now? Because it cracks a historical illusion. That power and firstness belong to one voice only. The Gospel, fragmentary and transgressive, suggests otherwise, that creation witnessed more than one speaker, and that some of those speakers were silenced for convenience. If you walk past a nursery and see an amulet above the crib, you might be seeing a remnant. Protection that once feared the night woman, and now honors a different narrative. If you scroll at midnight and find a low-resolution JPG of a winged seal, remember, images carry memory, not proof. Memory shapes belief, and belief shapes lives. Tonight, try a small experiment. Speak your name aloud, not as a label but as a claim. Notice how the room listens. Notice what it means to be named by yourself. If the first woman could refuse, then you can refuse too. The scripts that demand you bend, the roles offered without asking. If you found this dive useful, if the idea of a forbidden gospel intrigues you, subscribe for more deep reconstructions of the stories buried at the edges of history. If you have a fragment, a relic, a photograph, or a marginal note, send it. We read everything. We follow threads. Because the thing about forbidden words is this: they wait. They listen for someone to say them back.